Welcome back to the Unnamed Game Co. World Building Series, Episode 8, Let's Do It, Part 2, A Story. My name is Caradwin, they, them pronouns. If you haven't seen Episode 1 through 6, you probably should, because they lay the groundwork for everything we're talking about today. And if you have been keeping up with the series and you came back for Episode 8, thank you. I appreciate that. Especially because the last episode was so long. Alright, so today I'm going to try really hard to make this episode shorter, and we're going to start with building from a story. Previously, we talked about how when constructing stories for your world, you want to focus on things that have happened, not things that may happen. The things that happen in your game are plot, the things that have happened are world building. So we're going to focus on our past events that are going to shape this world that we are going to build to then tell the future stories. Now, I could have come up with a story of my own and, built a world for it, but the problem is, for me, I kind of do all those things simultaneously, and I wanted to really demonstrate the process sort of in a pure way, so I decided to use a random story generator, and this was the result. Yep. I'm not gonna lie, I was not super excited about this story. Seventh Sanctum has a random story generator. I set it to free-for-all, one story, and this is what we got. The story is about a nurturing pundit from a big family. It starts in a legendary land on our world in a new magical age. Magic is fading in power, and that plays an important role in the story. That didn't really excite me very much. So what I've decided to do is move forward with it anyway, because the whole point is that this process works no matter where you're coming from, right? So, alright, we're going to start with a story that I'm not super crazy about, and it'll be great. Probably. So typically I would start with an inciting incident and figure out the main story from there, but today we're going to start with a main story and then work our way backward to the inciting incident. So I'm not going to lie, I looked up pundit because I was like, I think I know what that is, but I don't know that I know what that is, so I figured out what it is, and it's just an expert that people call on to give talks about stuff, and the next thing I need to do is pick my legendary land. Now when you search for legendary land, it brings up a bunch of magic cards, which was not particularly helpful, although they were very pretty. So once I switched to legendary places in the world, I got this list and I was like, okay, let's do Atlantis. That's nice. Atlantis is cool. It's underwater. And if you watched the previous episode, you know I love underwater societies. So we're going to go with that. So I had to think about what I wanted the problem to be. So we have magic is fading in power, and why is that a problem? How does that affect Atlantis? Well, Atlantis is a magical city. It's underneath the water. It used to be above the water, now it's under the water. It's protected by magic. Maybe there's a magical pearl, and the magical pearl is fading in power because it's linked to some anchors on the land which have been damaged by, I don't know, global warming or something. And now the pearl is fading and the magic is leaching out of Atlantis and it's spilling out into the world, which is causing all kinds of problems on the outside world. But the main problem is the people who live under the domes in Atlantis will stop being protected from, the crushing pressure and freezing water outside. Problems. And I was also thinking about another underwater feature with Disney princesses, and I'm thinking this pundit is kind of like an Ariel who is super obsessed with the outside world, wants to go exploring. They've been picking up thingamabobs. Maybe they go on little expeditions to pick up trinkets and doodads and try and figure out how they work, and they're an expert in technology. And that makes sense because in a magical society, you don't need a high level of technology because why would you build a machine to do it when you can just cast a spell, right? But the problem is, now that magic is fading, we need technology in Atlantis. So, the main story is about an expert in the outside world from a big family, starts in Atlantis, which is in a new magical age, and magic is fading in power in Atlantis because it's spilling into the outside world. So our inciting incident is that the expert has gone out into the world to try and discover what's happening and how to fix it, but they've gone missing. I'm thinking maybe they had magical conch shell communication tools and they haven't been able to check in for a while. So their family is going to go out looking for them. All right. So now I think we've got a pretty good story. We've got a pretty good inciting incident. We've done a little bit of building about Atlantis. And now let's look at our game objective. Obviously, I'm not running this game, so I'm just going to make it up. But what do I hope to get out of the game? I want to have an intellectual, conceptual experience. Because when I first read that little story snippet, I was like, that sounds really stupid. And I was like, well, yeah, let's make it smart. Let's make it smart. And why do I want to run it? Well, I want to tell a story about families and our values. Because we've got this central core conflict between valuing technology versus magic and exploration versus insulation, which is pretty cool. And what do I want my players to get out of it? Well, I hope that they think big thoughts. I think this would be an interesting game to use as sort of a filter for our own experiences and what we value and our family and our relationships and how all of that relates to our relationship with technology and maybe exploration and things like that, which leads us to our keywords. Our items that we want to make sure our stories are supporting, we want to have an intellectual experience. We want to talk about family. We want to talk about values. We want to do big thinking. And I'm going to combine intellectual and thinking into one. So we're going to weigh our different choices and world building around, are they going to support our family values and thinking? And for the first part, genre is pretty easy. The genre that we're going with is low fantasy because it's set in the real world, it has magic, and the technology pieces aren't super advanced because it's just our normal tech, and I don't think that genre is going to have any problem with our main objectives. Because the objectives are fairly broad, family, values, thinking, I don't think that the low fantasy is going to particularly impede that. Are there other genres which might be better for supporting family values and thinking? Maybe. Low fantasy is traditionally not a highly intellectual venue, but we're gonna go there. It'll be fine. It'll be great. And when we're looking at our tropes, along the lines, the genre tends to be fairly juvenile. A lot of, teen dramas and vampire stories tend to fall under that low fantasy category. So we need to be mindful of that because I want to sort of elevate the genre a little bit to meet my thinking goals. And I want to definitely avoid the chosen one for this one because I want it to be about family values. And if it's a chosen one, that's not great for a family. And we want to avoid the teen drama because I do want it to be a little more intellectual. And while there are definitely some big thinking things that you can do with the teen drama, because it is centered around that particular age, it kind of limits your scope. And I want to avoid that. And the wise old mentor has all the answers. Well, that's not going to be great for thinking and evaluating because the point of a mentor who is wise and old is to give you all the answers. And I want my players to have to figure out the answers on their own. So how are we going to address this? Well, I'm thinking that part of the character creation will have the players figure out how their characters relate to our missing pundit so that they can you sort of have a reason for going and doing what they're doing. That way they're not the chosen ones. They have chosen to go. And we want to talk about how we feel about this magical loss to help increase that investment. The Magic Pearl didn't reach out and say, okay, you 5, you go, right? And these are people who have decided on their own independently to try and save the world. And they need reasons and motivations for doing so. And I want to make sure that my players are choosing characters that have a wide range of ages because, they're related. They could be cousins, aunts, brothers, sisters, family-in-law. Like, they could have lots of different relations. And I think that'll help to broaden out the scope and increase our age range to avoid the teen dramas, although we could have some adolescents. And we'll make sure that our player characters have relationships with each other and goals that they want to accomplish so that as we're doing our role play, we don't just have constant drama. Maybe we have people who have a legitimate grievance between each other and they need to resolve that. Or maybe somebody is engaged to be married to the family and they're trying to win everybody's trust and things like that. So that's going to help to create stories that are not going to devolve to teen drama. And as for the wise old mentor, we're just going to leave Atlantis almost immediately. We're going to be there for maybe half of the first session and then we're going to get out of there because we don't want to spend a bunch of time with a whole bunch of people who are going to lecture and give their opinions and points of view. We want the player characters to go out into the world and form those ideas on their own. Now, some of the stereotypes for this genre are not going to apply, but I do want to keep an eye out for a couple of things. One of them is the problematic relationship as romance, where you have the stereotypical young girl who's burdened with a great task, and some older male who's, maybe a vampire or something is like, you smell delicious, I must have you, blah, blah, blah. And it's like romantic and kind of creepy and abusive, and that could be a problem. Another stereotype is the pure, virginal young femme, where there's some girl who's, like, never been touched or whatever, and she's got, like, superpowers because she's maintained her virginity, blah, 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 and you know what I'm talking about. And, of course, there's always the queer-coded villains. If you know, you know. Yeah, these are just a few examples. There's quite a few. And if you're interested in learning more about queer-coded villains, I recommend that you do a little bit of research, because it is freaking everywhere. Oh my god, it's exhausting. Anyway, so how are we going to deal with these potential stereotypes? Well, we're not going to build romance in. Like, we're just not going to make that a thing, because we want to focus on our value of family. And we're probably just not really going to have immortal beings. There's not going to be vampires or whatever. I mean, I guess there could be, but no, I'm just going to say there's not vampires. We'll figure out why later. And the solution for this Pearl problem is not going to be tied to any stupid ideas about purity. And we're going to make the culture of Atlantis a little more modern, because they have been around for thousands of years. They've grown, they've evolved, and in many ways they've probably evolved beyond us, because they've been out of the reach of certain corrupting forces and things like that. So we're just not going to deal with the pure virginal femme thing. And as for queer-coded villains, also, we're just not going to do that. Like, there's not, I think there's not actually going to be a villain. I think I'm just not going to have, a big evil person doing this. I think we'll focus on a more antagonistic villain rather than an evil villain. And I think we're going to go with an organization. I think because we need to support this family thing, a lot of our antagonists are going to end up being groups of people. And speaking of villains, let's go to villains. So what do I expect my protagonist to be like? Because I can't come up with the villains before I know what my heroes are. And obviously I don't know exactly what the player characters will be like, but what do I expect them to be like? What do I want? Well, I want them to be adventurers, explorers, and investigators. I want them to be the kind of people who are going to go out on adventures and do stuff, and hopefully also care about their family. But, maybe not. Who knows? We'll see. And that means that their rivals are also going to be adventurers, explorers, and investigators. So our main antagonists, we're going to just do an adventure, explorer, investigator. You'll notice I'm making this a lot more simple than last time, because I want it to take less time. Obviously, we could go into more detail and make this longer, more expansive, but we're not going to do that. Anyway, so our rivals. Our rivals are adventurers, explorers, and investigators. And I'm thinking about the I want to tell a story about families and our values. So I'm thinking that maybe there's a tight-knit group of people from the outside world who are seeking to understand the source of the newfound magic, right? And maybe they want to stop the magic, or maybe they want to enhance the magic. I don't know, but I'm thinking I'll build, after I have, the characters for my group, I'll start building this maybe like crackpot society of people who are investigating the magic. And I think they'll run into our player characters from time to time and maybe not realize that they're running into each other, but I think that'd be really funny. And I think it'll be a little more lighthearted, a little less big think, and they'll be a little more wacky and zany, tinfoil hat kind of people. So that's who our rivals are going to be. And they're going to be sort of traveling in the same directions as our main player characters, and we'll have some fun interactions with them. But they ultimately want the same goal. They want understanding, and maybe they'll be able to become allies and help them fix it. Yeah, it's good enough. And obviously, if I was going into more detail, I would build them out and come up with their names and stuff. But I think that it would be really good for this style of story in particular to build them as more foils to the party and have them have more customization than just what I could come up with off the top of my head. So our rivals are pretty much set there, and we need to come up with our antagonist. So for our antagonist, one, we want an adventurer. So I'm thinking a thrill-seeking couple, and they're out looking for adventure, doing deep sea diving or whatever. And maybe they found one of the relics that the player characters need to maybe it's a relic that will help the player characters locate the anchor points, because they need to find the anchor points in the world that are feeding the pearl and protecting Atlantis and stuff. So maybe there's a relic that's in a chasm somewhere, and these player characters are going out to try and find it, and they run into this adventurer couple who find it. And maybe the relic also shows the location of Atlantis. So this adventurer couple is also trying to find Atlantis, which could be problematic. I'm thinking they're YouTube people. They're people who are doing the TikToks and stuff, and they're thinking that this relic that's leading them somewhere could be their next big break into like their own Netflix show or something. I like that. That's fun. And that also talks about our values. So that's cool. We're dealing with, what do you value? The safety of this entire Atlantean people, or becoming a Netflix show? Like, what is more important to you? And how do the player characters interact with that conversation? And how would they persuade or work with or just steal the artifact from these people? And to tie them back into our main pundit, I think maybe they ran into the pundit. Maybe they backtrailed and followed where the pundit expert guy had come from, and that's how they ended up finding the relic, because the expert was leaving Atlantis and passed by the relic and maybe made a copy of it or took a piece of it. Maybe there's 2 pieces of this relic or something. And that's how this adventurer couple will help the player characters also then find their family member. And our antagonist too, I'm thinking an Indiana Jones kind of lady. Like, she's an archaeologist who like specializes in ancient sites and stuff. And she's found this Atlantean site, and it's starting to come alive as the magic is like leaching out of the pearl. It's sort of washing up back at this site, and she's trying to figure out how to activate more of it, which would be problematic, right? Because if the site is getting all of its power from the pearl in Atlantis, then the more lights she turns on, the more lights go out in Atlantis. So that could be an issue. But this could make or break the career, right? We have the resurgence of magic, and here this person who has dedicated their life to studying this culture has found this place which is coming alive with magic, and that's really exciting for them. And the player characters are saying, "Hey, can you not do this thing that would launch your career?" Yeah, that's that again. Thinking, values. I like that. That's really cool, because these people who are coming out of Atlantis will have to try and understand how important this is to this explorer, and find a way to convince them that they should just give it up. Oh, that's rough. World building. I'm thinking that archaeologists need funding, right? So I'm thinking that there must be getting some funding. Maybe there's a paranormal agency that is dedicated to identifying paranormal sites and stuff like that, and that's where this person is getting their funding from. Okay. All right. So maybe the explorer pundit guy went to the site where our explorer lady was, and he got arrested by that paranormal agency. Aha. Now we're getting somewhere. And that means that obviously our antagonist 3, the investigator, has to be like the team that is going out and trying to hunt down these rogue Atlanteans, and they want to bring him in dead or alive. And like, their whole purpose is ultimately good. They don't want magic to interfere with the world. They don't want people to become unduly powerful. I mean, imagine what a government would do with wizards. Like, it would not go well. But they have a limited point of view, and they have a limited perspective. This is one of those hammer and nail situations where they've been told, eliminate all of the threats, and that's made them a little short-sighted, and they can't see the same opportunities that they might be able to see if they were able to just have a normal conversation with an Atlantean. So I think that's a pretty solid antagonist 3. They're not villainous, they're not out for blood or anything, they're just doing their jobs, and their job is to protect the world, and magic is a threat to the world. And these tick all the boxes for me. Like, we're going to have good family conversations. We're going to do a lot of thinking. We're going to talk a lot about our values with all of these antagonists. Let's check it against our stereotypes. We're good here. I don't think we have any problems here. So I know we said we weren't going to have like a real villain, and we aren't. We're going to have this International Paranormal Investigation and Control Agency, IPICA. I like it because it sounds kind of like epic. So I did a little bit of Googling. And because I want to tie into our family, I think that IPICA will be based off of a family. Like, it's a family business that has grown into this big international thing. And I was like, oh, well, maybe they're kind of like the Van Helsings. And the maybe one of the inspirations for the Van Helsing was George Andreas Helvig. I'm probably saying that terribly. But he was a vampire hunter in the 1700s, so maybe his family kept on with the family business, and they've become paranormal hunters, and now they're entangled with a whole bunch of governments, and maybe the reason why there are no vampires and stuff is because they've been eradicated. And again, their intentions are good, but maybe over time they've become exceedingly militant and reliant on using their technology to exterminate magic, and unwilling to be open to the idea that magic and technology could work together, and maybe magic isn't evil. And the reason why we'll put them in the villain category is because they want to stamp out Atlantis. They want to find Atlantis and destroy it because it's a clear and present danger. And that's going to slide them into the villainous category. And maybe the relationship that the player characters form with our Antagonist 3 could help them circumnavigate that problem. And at some point we're going to have to, go into the IPICA facility and rescue our dear pundit, I guess. You'll notice I keep forgetting to add stuff for the pundit because I don't think that's a particularly interesting story, but it's all right. We're doing it. It's great. Everything's fine. So I think this villain is going to be supportive for all of our 3 major keywords, and let's look at our potential stereotypes. I think we're fine, and then we go to geography. All right. Yeah, we're flying through this one so much faster. This is like half the time of the other one. So for geography, we can keep it pretty blank. We don't have to go into a lot of intense detail about any of these places because the whole point of this campaign is that we're traveling from place to place to identify these sites and try and find our dear missing pundit person. So we just kind of have to figure out where Atlantis is and then where these sites are. And then as I would be running the campaign, I would go into more detail and flesh out these sites and maybe do a little more detail on Atlantis. But for now, we're going to hit the bullet points so that we can keep this episode relatively brief. Where in the world is underwater Atlantis? Well, obviously it's in the ocean, and it's obviously in the Atlantic Ocean. So, where in the Atlantic Ocean is Atlantis? Well, I pulled up a map. This map from Britannica.com has some of the features of Atlantis, and I was looking at it, I was thinking, well, where are these sites going to be? Because I do want the major sites of these anchor points to be on land, and I sort of drew these little circles around some interesting places with ancient technologies that, the pyramids and things like that. And I want Atlantis to be somewhere in between. Like, maybe Atlantis was an island in the ocean that ended up crashing for reasons, which I guess I could come up with as I flesh out this world building, but they really aren't important to the story that I want to tell. And I was thinking, well, we have a lot of transatlantic trade routes, so I pulled up this Marineverse traffic map, and if you overlay it, you see that there's a lot of travel in some places, and then there's this spot down here by the Cape Verde Basin, which doesn't have a lot of sea travel. Now, there are obvious real-world reasons for that, but what I'm interested in is finding a place where there's going to be less travel, where it will make sense for Atlantis to be. Is this super crucial, vital, and important? Do you need to go into this level of detail when picking? No, you can pick an arbitrary place and be like, it's never been found because of magic. But you know how I am. I got to be extra. So we have picked our place. Atlantis is in the north of the Cape Verde Basin in the Atlantic. Hooray! So if that's where our Atlantis is, then our anchor points need to be around it. And when I'm looking at these anchor points, I'm thinking we'll have maybe 5, because normally I do everything in triads, but I drew a star and I was like, well, I'll do it in 5. Why not? 5 is good. And maybe there's 3 damaged anchor points. So just picking some places within my scope of interest, which, are roughly equidistant from the Camp Verde Basin. I've got Portugal, the Amazon, and Florida. Because why not? If you have a chance to have your Atlanteans deal with crocodiles, why would you not do that? Or are they alligators? Anyway, not important. So we have our 3 damaged sites picked out, and for our 2 intact anchors, I have selected Newfoundland and Ascension Island. And I think it would be cool if Ithaca's main headquarters was at one of the intact sites. So I'm gonna put them on Ascension Island, and then I think we'll put one of our ally groups on the Newfoundland place. But we'll deal with that when we get to it. But we're going to use these 2 intact anchors as the sort of headquarters for our major villainous organization and our major heroic organization. I guess the opposite of villainous is heroic. Anyway, as I went adventure by adventure, building the different encounters and stuff, I would flesh out each of these sites to give them a map and people who are there and NPCs and things to interact with, challenges and puzzles and stuff. But we're not going to do that because that's not world building, that's more plot building. So let's move on to those allies that I was talking about. So we need some allies who are going to help the players out along the way. Much in the same way as I did last episode, I'm going to take those 3 groups of antagonists, I'm going to create my allies to be like them. And so for my adventures, I'm thinking that maybe there's a couple who are cryptids who travel the world looking for paranormal thrills, because that's kind of funny. Just imagine there's a Selkie and the last werewolf who are going on their honeymoon, traveling around to different magical sites. That amuses me. And it also gives them a reason to come back multiple times and to have the player characters maybe have their number and be like, hey, you said you were going to the Amazon, right? Well, we're in the Amazon. Could you help us out? So I like that idea. And also it's a nice foil to our other antagonist who couple, and the cryptids are trying to keep it on the down low. They don't have a YouTube. Maybe they have a blog. Maybe they do a Tumble or something. And then in contrast to our explorer who's doing the archaeology and stuff, I think maybe it'd be cool if we had a coven of witches who were dedicated to finding and protecting magical sites, and maybe maybe the player characters will run into them in a couple different places, because the witches are also trying to identify the sources of these magic and protect the world and stuff like that, which makes them a solid ally group. Also, again, you're noticing that I'm giving these allies lots of reasons to travel so that the player characters can interact with them in different places, because I want to make sure that the allies make sense for the kind of story that I'm telling, and this story is going to be moving across lots of different places within the world. And then for our 3rd big ally, I think this is the structure that's going to be in Newfoundland, where there's a secret group of people who are sworn to protect the paranormal. They are standing in opposition of Ithaca, and maybe they come from the same family tree, and there was a divide at some point where one of the family members was like, we shouldn't just be eradicating, we should be learning how to live with them, we should be learning from them, we should be working with them, and that caused a divide. That's going to help support my keyword of family and values and things like that. And I mean, maybe one of the main resolution paths could be to repair the bonds between these 2 family tree branches and help them come together and find resolution, because that would be a really cool way to end this, since we don't have a direct super evil villain who needs to be defeated. We've got something a little more heartfelt, a little more emotional, and I think we can build that in with that alliance structure. And with that, I think we've done it. We did it in less than half an hour. Woo! Hey, we did it! Party! All right, we built a world in 30 minutes. Obviously, it's not as in-depth and detailed as I could have gone, because when you're running a world and building a world, you're going to be deep diving into these topics that I'm just doing bullet points on. But you can see how we can use this structure and format to build a world to support a story. And I talked a little bit about the distinction between plot and story and how they are different. And your world building is not the same as your plot building, but in the course of doing your world building, you will be doing plot building. You will be building things into the world that the player characters are hopefully going to interact with. And it has to happen simultaneously. It kind of has to happen all together in order to come together, I think. But yeah, I think that came out pretty okay. Is this the kind of game that I would want to run? Probably not. This isn't my flavor personally, but I think it's a pretty good concept, and I think it demonstrates how the process works when you're building out of a story. So I'm pretty pleased with the final results, and I hope you liked it too. I would love to know your thoughts if you would care to share them down in the comments. And if you liked this video and you want to see more, do the like thing, do the subscribe thing. Those are important. And that's the official end of our episode. So yeah, thank you again for your time, and I look forward to talking to you in the next episode. And if you would care to stay around, we're going to take a trip to the Cascadon Corner. One of the things that I didn't talk about is that stories aren't always true. And I think that's really important when you're doing your world building for epic campaigns. When we think about stories in worlds, we tend to just think that they're fact. And they aren't. When we look at stories in our world, we have so much built into our stories and legends and myths, which have been exaggerated and embellished over time because they've been told so many times. They've gone through different cultures. People have used them for their own political gains and political means. So one of the things that I do when I run Cascadon is I always warn my players that they shouldn't take everything at face value, because I have built into some of the stories that I tell falsehoods. There are things that people in the world say over and over and over again which are patently false, which are untrue. One of the exciting things that happens when I'm running the game is as my players learn more and develop their own points of view and perspective and gain more information, they're able to identify those falsehoods. And that thrills me. That's just one of my favorite things. So I want to talk a little bit about a story in Cascadon. And the story is that when the first Cascadon, the king of Cascadon, decided that he wanted a coastline, he cut across the land and took the port of New Hope, and then the people he took it from, the Hestrians, their society collapsed. This coincides with another story, the story of Veritas. Veritas was from Vestria, and he was a friend to Cascadon, and perhaps more than a friend, perhaps a lover, ? And while Cascadon was dealing with this whole port situation, there was also something going on in Apper, where the barony of Apper was like, hey, you wanted all of this wood so that you could build weapons and stuff, but we're running into a problem. There are these monsters in the woods, and our people are dying, etc., blah, blah, blah. Can you please send help? Cascadon is like, I'm busy. I'm trying to take a whole port city here, but fine. And he sends Veritas to go check it out. Veritas goes, and he defeats the Umber Hulk. And the way that he does this is he retrieves a blade from the Lake of Laketown. Yeah, I have a lake named Laketown. But remember, I'm bad at naming things. Anyway, not important. So, he retrieves this blade. And it's this super magical artifact from his patron deity, Justina. And he goes back to Cascadon after doing this. And he's like, okay, well, I slayed an avatar of a god. And that's a thing that happened, and that's kind of the end of the story. The true story, the real story, the history, is that Veritas brought the blade back to Port of New Hope and said, look, Cascadon, you are kicking up a hornet's nest here. You have been cutting into this forest. You angered the goddess Zubin, who sent one of her avatars to wreck your shit. And I had to defeat an avatar of a god. While you're over here playing Conqueror, your people need you. You need to go pull back. You have stretched too far. You need to focus on what's really important. Is taking this port city this valuable to you, that you would let hundreds of your people die trying to gather wood and supplies for your war effort? Cascadon didn't hear any of that. What he heard was, I have a magic sword that can kill gods. And he was like, bruh, you've got to give me that weapon. And Veritas is looking at Cascadon like, are you insane? You've become drunk with power. What happened to you? What happened, man? And Cascadon becomes enraged, and he draws his magical weapon, which is the claw of a dragon. And Veritas
He doesn't even use his blade. He just tinks the dragon claw with the hilt of his sword, and the claw shatters. And Veritas says, I see that you have lost your mind. You've lost your vision, your values. I can't see how this ends well for you. Cascadon is embarrassed and angry, and Veritas puts a hand on his shoulder and says, that's cool. I'll take care of this for you. Veritas walks away, bringing the blade with him, and he sets his path south. He starts walking, and he goes all the way down to the Eason, which is the capital city of the Kingdom of Hestrion, which Cascadon is trying to take the port from. And he goes in there, and he says, this is where I will bury this blade. He drives the blade into the foundation of the Eason, which is an ice palace. It gets consumed by the earth. The Kingdom of Hestrion literally and figuratively collapses. And Cascadon gets his port. But that whole story about Veritas confronting Cascadon, that is apocryphal. The average citizen will tell you, oh, yes, the Cascadon took the port and the civilization of Hestrion crumbled. That's history. That's fact. But in reality, there's so much more. That conversation between the two of them changed the course of history. And yet, it is known to only a very, very few. My player characters almost always find out the story. Almost always. Because I love when they get to discover it. I love to have something that they thought was true to turn out to be much more complicated. I love when people learn things that expand their point of view, which help them gain perspective on history. And that's the power of stories with falsehoods, with omissions. If you don't tell the whole story, then the players get to discover the story. And then they have to deal with it. How do they feel about that? What's the outcome like when you don't know what truth is? When you have to find your own truth. I love that. Anyway, so I'll stop rambling about stories in Cascadon. I hope you enjoyed my little dramatic retelling. I promise I do a much better job when I'm actually running the game, but for a little shorthand to strangers on the internet, I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope that I get to talk to you again in our next episode. Don't know what we're doing yet, but it'll be great, whatever it is. All right. Bye.